Everyone wants to gain muscle and lose fat at the same time. But is it actually possible, or is it just another fitness myth? The internet is filled with people claiming that you have to bulk to build muscle and cut to lose fat. But what if I told you that that's not the whole story? The reality is that we're either too afraid of being too skinny, or whenever we need to create the right conditions for building muscle, then we're just too afraid of gaining body fat. And when that happens, that can leave people in a place where they're making zero progress either way. Now, there is an order of priority in terms of nutrition and training for each of these scenarios, and also when you want to do both. When you want to do both is known as body recomposition. And I'm going to be sharing exactly what that needs to look like in order for you to be able to accomplish it properly. We will dive into the science behind this and even look at the data on body recomposition and reveal my experience working with pro NFL athletes who in less than 12 weeks packed as much as 10 pounds of muscle and lose equal amounts of fat and what it took. Today, we're breaking down the science behind body recomposition, who can actually do it, the biggest mistakes that keep people stuck, and the exact training and nutrition priorities that actually make it happen. Want to find out the truth about this? Make sure you keep watching. Hey guys, what's going on? This is Andres here, registered dietitian and strength coach. I help successful high-performing men build muscle, lose fat, and optimize their nutrition without the gimmicks. If you are new here and you don't know who I am. If you ever wonder whether you can get leaner while building muscle mass, today's video is just for that and for you. We're diving into the science behind how muscle gain and fat loss actually work, the biggest mistakes that sabotage your progress, and the exact strategy that you need to make body recomposition happen. And by the end of this video, you know exactly where your focus should be on body recomposition, if maybe you'd be better off taking a different approach. If that sounds good, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and let's get right into it. All right, so let's break this down scientifically, because if you don't understand how muscle gain and fat loss actually work, what's gonna happen is you're gonna keep spinning your wheels trying to do both at the same time. Let's first cover how muscle gain happens. Muscle growth, also known as hypertrophy, requires three main ingredients, or three main things. One is a strong training stimulus. Your muscles need a reason to grow, which means you need to really overload it. This is called progressive overload, which means lifting heavier over time or increasing intensity, which we're gonna cover that a little bit today. We also need to ensure that we're getting adequate amount of protein, because your body needs the building blocks. Protein is broken down into amino acids, and they're helpful for repairing and growing muscle tissue. And number three, you need enough energy to support recovery. This is where things get tricky. Traditionally, muscle gain happens best in a calorie surplus. Besides this, there are important factors that also play a larger role, including sleep, the right supplementation, stress management, and proper hormone balance. But here's the thing, muscle growth doesn't only happen in a surplus. If you're eating at a maintenance or even in a slight deficit while training properly and getting enough protein, you can still build muscle, especially if you're new to lifting or coming back from a break. We're going to look at some of the studies that actually prove that. But before we do that, let's talk about how fat loss happens. On the flip side, fat loss is all about energy balance, specifically a calorie deficit. This means burning more energy that you consume, forcing your body to tapping into stored fat for fuel. But here's the problem. If you cook calories too aggressively, your body can start to break down muscle tissue for energy instead of fat. That's why people end up what it's called skinny fat. They lose weight, but they don't necessarily look lean or muscular or full. So can you actually do both at the same time? That's the question that you're here for me to answer, right? Yes, you can, but under the right conditions. And this is a process known as body recomposition. And it works perfect or best for four types of individuals. Number one, beginners who are new to lifting. They can gain muscle fast even in a slight deficit. Number two, overweight individuals. They have enough stored energy to support muscle growth. Number three, people coming back from a break. Muscle memory helps them regain lost muscle mass. And I'll give you a quick backstory. On 2009, I was actually one of these three. Specifically, somebody coming back from a break. I had an injury that happened on my left knee where I actually had to get knee surgery. And I remember when I compared my right leg with my left leg, the amount of muscle mass I had lost was crazy. But I was very surprised with the amount that it took for me to regain it back as soon as I actually started working out again. So that would be an example of somebody that has the muscle memory and who came back and usually gained the muscle relatively quick. And the last group of people are those willing to push your body to pretty high intensities and volumes of training in the gym. These are the group of people that are already lean or experienced working out, because body recomposition becomes much more harder, though not impossible. At this point, most people see better results by focusing on one goal at a time, either a lean bulk or a dedicated fat loss phase, but we'll talk more about this. So is body recomposition actually backed by science? Let's look at what the research says. For untrained individuals, so people who are newbies in the gym, the capacity to gain muscle and lose fat simultaneously, it's much higher for both men and women. In women, for example, this particular study found that when obese women were put on an 800 calorie per day deficit for 3 months while doing a strength training program, they lost an average of 35 pounds while increasing muscle mass in the process. fats. In men, this 12-week study looked at overweight police officers who were put on one of three groups: a hypocaloric diet or a low-calorie diet, a hypocaloric diet plus a resistance training program, and they were giving them a casein supplement or a casein protein, and a third group who instead of casein, they used whey. Both protein plus training groups saw a massive increase in muscle while losing fat at the same time. But what about those who are fairly lean at this point, who want to gain some muscle without adding the spare tires? There's a really cool review done by some of my friends here at University of Tampa, where I reside, and it was published in the Strength and Conditioning Journal that examined whether trained individuals who typically have a harder time gaining muscle and losing fat at the same time can still achieve body recomposition. They looked at 18 different studies that evaluated training, nutrition, and supplementation in that group of people. Here's what they found. Number one, muscle growth and fat loss can happen simultaneously, but the right conditions matter. Unlike beginners who experience rapid changes, trained individuals really need more precise strategies. The second piece is that protein intake is key. The research emphasized that maintaining adequate protein intake is so crucial to preserving and building muscle mass while losing body fat. This supports muscle protein synthesis, or MPS, which is essential for maintaining lean mass. Number three, resistance training with progressive overload is a must. To build muscle while in a deficit or at maintenance calories, training needs to be intense. Progressively lifting heavier weights or increasing volume over time is really what drives muscle growth. Number four, it really depends on the individual. There's factors like training history, genetics, and adherence that play a massive role in how effective body recomposition is going to be. Some people will respond better than others based on their experience levels and how consistently they follow a structured plan. Number five, calorie balance actually matters. While a small deficit can work for recomposition, eating at a maintenance or in a slight surplus while optimizing protein intake and strength training tends to yield better muscle growth outcomes. Now, this study really confirms that even trained individuals can gain muscle and lose fat simultaneously, but it's a lot more difficult and requires strategic nutrition and training to be able to make it happen. So by now, you have learned a few things. You know what is required for muscle gains and also what is required for fat loss. And we know body recomposition, which is doing both at the same time, will vary depending on the person, their training status, their genetics, and other factors. So with that in mind, let's look at the biggest mistakes that I'm seeing guys make around this. Because I feel like if you stop making this, maybe you're going to have a better chance or a better shot at actually accomplishing both of these things at the same time, if that's what you're looking to do. Number one, not eating enough protein. If you're trying to build muscle while losing fat, protein is your best friend. We just mentioned this, but most people don't necessarily eat nearly enough. We know this is important because, again, protein supports MPS and it helps prevent muscle loss in a calorie deficit. This happens often when people cut calories without really prioritizing protein, which can lead to muscle loss instead of fat loss. This is why sometimes I tell people, do you want to lose weight or you want to lose fat? The second thing is overdoing the calorie deficit. This is a massive one because people think that to lose fat, they need to be in a massive deficit in calories, but if you cut out too much, you're gonna lose muscle along with fat in the process. And slashing calories dramatically, thinking it will speed up fat loss, just leads to low energy, stall progress, and a muscle breakdown. You know what, I'm seeing this a lot in men and women who go into GLP-1 drugs like Ozempic or Mounjaro without proper guidance, because appetite gets shut, and then they make mistakes number one that I just shared, mistakes number two, which is lower protein intake and very aggressive calorie restriction. So even though they're having a massive amount of weight lost, it's not all great that is being lost, and that starts to affect things like metabolism, because when you have less muscle in your body, typically your metabolic rate tends to lower down. Number three, not training hard enough. This is a huge one. This is going to be hard to hear, but the reality is that most people do not train nearly as hard as they think they do. I see this in the gym all the time. Those gym bros who are lifting and doing reps, just going through the motions. You know who I'm talking about, right? Like, they're hanging out, training with their buddies and like watching and checking out Instagram while like doing a few reps in there. That's not conducive to actually muscle growth. You have to have a sustained, focused effort in training to be able to do that. Your body needs progressive overload, which means lifting heavier over time or increasing intensity to stimulate muscle growth. This is why just going to the gym without a plan or a structured program, it's not really getting you anywhere, more so than just being active. Doing the same workouts with the same weights and expecting results is a surefire way to continue to fail at this. Number four is doing too much cardio. This is a common one where guys will push their bodies on the weights, but because they're either eating too many calories to bulk or simply because they want to lose as much fat while gaining muscle in the process, they will do endless and excessive cardio to accomplish this. This is not helpful at all. It's important to keep your cardio sessions strategic to ensure that you're not risking muscle loss in the process. And the last one is focusing too much on the scale weight. Here's the reality, guys. If you're gaining muscle while losing fat, the scale might not really move much. And that's actually a good thing. Yet so many people get so worried about this. Take a look at this photo by my client Lucas, who worked with me for a few months. Both of these photos have the exact same weight. Now, besides good lighting, you can clearly see a more muscular build and also a leaner build on the right. So how is it possible that he did not lose any weight? Well, muscle is denser than fat, so your weight might stay the same or even increase while your body looks leaner. During body recomposition stages or phases, the scale is not a great marker of progress, so I personally recommend to take photos instead. Now we're going to dive into a topic I like to call hierarchy of priorities for both muscle gain, fat loss, and body recomposition. After working with hundreds of clients who I have helped accomplish these three things, I developed what I like to call a hierarchy of priorities for body transformations, which will break down what your focus should be in each scenario. So we're going to break down the three things in the order of priority that I personally think you need to start to focus on. For muscle gain with minimal fat gain, resistance training should be the number one thing. The right hypertrophy resistance training program that creates the right stimulus for growth. This needs to have a progressive overload component, which means you have to incrementally add more weight throughout the week. I'm not going to get too much into the rep ranges and what your training needs to look at the gym because my forte has always been nutrition, but it needs to be something that makes sense from the rep and set standpoint to ensure that you're meeting and you're getting to those goals of incrementally adding more weight throughout the week and also throughout the month. A lot of mental effort should be placed on how hard you push yourself in the gym. The second thing we need to be prioritizing is protein. Getting at least 0.8 to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight is going to be key. Quality of protein is also important here, so you need to make sure you're taking care of that. Now, third in the list is calories. Ideally, eating above your maintenance calories or right at it, if the last two are met, will probably be key for this. Number four is going to be sleep. Getting at least 8 hours of sleep during muscle gaining phases is so important to allow for adequate recovery. Number five is going to be supplementation. Supplementing with protein and things like creatine and other evidence-based ingredients may enhance your muscle building journey as well. And the last one is going to be cardio. This is the least important, yet you can incorporate sparingly. So what is the order of hierarchy now when we're switching into a fat loss mode with minimal muscle loss? Because that's the goal in here. This is, to me, one of the easier things to accomplish because the overarching theme for fat loss is to maintain the right calorie balance tilted constantly in the direction of a deficit. This means that energy expended is higher than the energy consumed. And that can be accomplished three ways. You either cut calories consumed, which is what you eat, you increase the calories burned, your exercise and movement, or you do both. I like the approach where we first focus on reducing your calorie intake through food, and then we start to increase your movement. This is the order of priority that I personally like to follow with a lot of my clients when they enter into this phase. Number one is caloric balance or calories. I would typically focus on maintaining a small yet controlled calorie deficit of 200 to 500 calories below their maintenance levels. Second thing is usually movement, increasing daily movement, also known as NEAT or non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So you expend more calories daily. It's going to be so important, more so than even the time that you're spending in the gym. Number three is resistance training. You see how in here is number three, while in muscle building is usually number one, because at this point, resistance training is usually done for maintenance of muscle, not necessarily for building more. This is where a lot of people are making mistakes because they feel like they need to train 6 days a week or 5 days a week because the focus on here is not necessarily to build, but to maintain muscle mass. Number four is going to be cardio. If number two is not as high, you will probably need to increase your cardio volume to make up for the calorie expenditure that is not created daily through just daily movement. And there's two different kinds of cardio that you will most likely are able to do throughout this process, either HIIT or high intensity interval training, or LIST, which is low intensity steady state cardiovascular activities. These are the kind of things that you'll do on a treadmill or a Stairmaster or just something that raises your heart rate to a level that you still can have a normal conversation with somebody that is doing it with you. But I'm going to continue to reiterate that cardio is not a requirement for this process, but it can definitely help speed the process, or it would have to be a complete replacement if you're a very sedentary person on a day-to-day basis. Number five is going to be stress management. I emphasize this because high stress can lead to overeating, which makes it harder to stick to a deficit and to those goals. And the last one is going to be sleep. Getting 8+ hours of sleep will ensure adequate recovery, but also research has shown that sleep deprivation can lead to increased cravings and calorie intake as well. If there's anything that I would probably leave last in here, it's definitely going to be something like supplementation, whether it's protein, creatine, or whatever it is that is going to help you maintain maintain and keep muscle mass intact. I realized also that I mentioned calories, but I didn't really mention too much about protein. Protein is equally important through this process, and getting the same amount of protein you would for muscle gaining is actually super key. Why? Because keeping your calories or at least your protein elevated is going to really help maintain the muscle that you do have in your body, so that there's obviously no losses around that. So getting enough protein through this process is equally important in the nutritional portion of things. Now, what about body recomposition, which is really what you're here for? What happens if I want to do both? What is the prescription for this? Well, here it is. The first thing that I would focus on is resistance training at least 4 times a week, always focusing on the right amount of intensity to make sure they're creating the right stimulus. Number 2 is going to be a slight calorie deficit, no more than 200 calories less from your maintenance per day, with the big focus on getting at least 0.8 to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight in protein. Number 3, it's cardio, ideally HIIT type of cardio 2 to 3 times a week. Number 4 is going to be sleep and stress management for the reasons that I mentioned earlier. Number 5 is going to be supplementation. Now, you need to understand that when trying to do both, the process is longer and patience is so key. This is a longer game. Most people are in a hurry, and what happens is they end up getting stuck in the process and they give up pretty easily. This is why I don't necessarily recommend a body recomposition unless you're just getting started doing exercise. Now, remember when I mentioned at the beginning of this video that I work with NFL athletes who indeed achieved insane body recomposition results? Well, let me show you what they did in short, so you understand what it took for that to be the case. Number 1 is we controlled their breakfast every day in the mornings to ensure that they had enough energy to be able to push through their workouts throughout that day. We created a supplement plan and tracked that they took everything that they were recommended. In fact, we gave it to them at breakfast to make sure that they were taking it. Then after this, they went to work out and do a field work for about 2 hours in the morning. They would come back for recovery shakes right after, which we make sure that they had enough protein and had enough calories in them. And a couple hours later, they would have lunch. Now in the afternoon, they would have a 90-minute lifting session 3 to 4 times a week. They would have recovery sessions twice a week, mobility and yoga once a week, and dinner and snacking recommendations for the rest of the day. As you can see, they spend their entire full day working on their body. I mean, after all, it is their moneymaker as they get paid based on physical performance. Well, here's the reality for most of us. If we work in an office like what you see in here, we don't have that kind of time, nor that we actually need it. Gaining 10 pounds of muscle and losing 10 pounds of fat in less than 2 months, naturally, may be possible only when these things are put into place, but most of us cannot really commit to something like this. So what's left to focus on is, well, what's realistic for you? Like if you're a dad like myself, for example, where training is limited to maybe 45 to 60 minutes a day, I promise you it's so difficult for me to try to even do both. And this is actually why I recommend my clients against it, and instead pick a lane and stick to it, knowing that there will be a plan to follow afterwards. Now, I know this sounds like a lot to figure out on your own. The truth is, like, most people struggle with this stuff because they don't really have a clear roadmap or right guidance in the process. This is why so many guys spin their wheels, second guess every decision, and never actually see the results that they want to. But that doesn't have to be you. I actually put together an incredible free training specifically for men who want to build a head-turning physique, breaking down the biggest mistakes that are keeping you stuck and exactly what you need to do instead. This is the same webinar that hundreds of my clients actually watch before making the changes that transform their bodies and their lives, and it could be the turning point for you too. So if you're serious about making real progress and want a step-by-step plan to be able to build muscle, lose fat, and look your absolute best, head over to the link below and register now. It's completely free, so I want to make sure you're not missing out on that. Now, before I go, I would love to hear from you. What is your biggest takeaway? What is your biggest challenge? Share in the comments. We'd love to be able to help you out as best as I can. But that's all I have for today. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. One new video every single Wednesday. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next week.